What's up guys, Justin here with the CGEssentials.com, back with another Blender new feature video for you. So in today's video we're going to do a little update on the asset browser that's now contained inside of the Blender 3.0 release. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So if you remember, we talked about the asset browser feature in the past, and originally I think the thought was that it was going to come out in like Blender 2.92 or something like that. Well, it got pushed back to a different release, and so I wanted to give a little update on where it's at, what it looks like, other things like that. So first things first, where to find it. Note that this is still an experimental feature, meaning it's in an experimental version of Blender that hasn't been released for production work. But you can find it by going to blender.org, going to download, and then scrolling down for the download Blender experimental version. What that's going to do is that's going to allow you to download an experimental version of Blender. Please read the warnings in here. Obviously these can be unstable and mess up your files. Don't use these with anything that you're worried about losing. But in this case, you can download the 3.0 alpha version right here, and it's going to have a version of the asset browser built in. And so when I open that up, first things first, you can access that by opening up that version of Blender. And then now if you click the little drop down on your editor type, there's an option for asset browser. So what that's going to do is that's going to give you access to all of your different assets that you've saved inside of your library. So for example, and I'm going to go to a different folder, I've got all these brick materials in here that are saved as an asset library. This can be a huge time saver because it means you don't have to go in and mess with appending different materials or other things like that. You can literally just like drag them in now. And so if I drag this in here, you can see how I can quickly apply materials to this box, for example. So it's going to be a huge time saver, probably one of the biggest features that I'm excited about with Blender. But what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about how you can create different assets as well as how you can save them for future use. First off, let's talk about where the assets get saved, because that's going to kind of drive the way that you're going to work with this. So if you go up to Edit, Preferences, there's an option in here under File Paths where you can save your asset libraries. So see, for example, I have a folder right now named Justin's Assets that lives inside of this folder on my computer. So one thing I do want to note about that is basically what happens is you save blend files in this folder, and then you can access the stuff inside of those files through the asset browser. And one thing I do want to note is originally I had to go in and create this folder manually. So this doesn't automatically create this folder. So you might have to go into this file and then add a Blender assets folder. You can also put these wherever you want, but you're going to have to make the folder wherever it's going to go. Otherwise you're going to get an error message right here. Notice that you can also add multiple folders in here just by clicking the plus button right here and then adding a new name and path. And so once you get that set up, you can see how I have two blend files in here, one for my brick and stone texture and one for my example models. Really whatever file you save in that folder is going to show up in your asset browser down below. And the way that you're going to access that is right now, notice how I have this option here for current file. So that's going to show the assets that are currently available in this file. And the only thing that this has right here is this old medieval wall. But if you click on the drop down right here, you can access that Justin's Assets file or whatever you named it just by clicking on it right here. Well, then anything that's in any of the folders that's in there is going to show up in this list. So for example, I've got these two models that are inside of this example models blend file that have been saved into the assets library. Well, now I can bring those into this folder or this file as well. So for example, if I wanted to bring this sculpture in, notice how all I have to do is drag it in. And it comes in with any materials or anything like that that were applied to it. So again, super big time saver. You can save, as far as I know, as many files as you want in here. I haven't tested what that does to performance or anything like that, but that's generally how you're going to manage the files for your asset browser. And so let's say I wanted to add something to that example models file. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that file so we can take a look at it. So this is the example models file that has the two models in here that are currently showing up in my library. Well, let's say we wanted to add something else to our library. So let's say that we wanted to add, we'll just do a Shift A and we'll just add a Suzanne to this. So right here. So I've got a Suzanne in here. Let's go ahead and let's apply a material to it as well. So we'll just come over here to our materials and let's just add something simple, maybe like a blue color. we'll turn the roughness down on it a little bit. So nothing complicated, but let's say that we had this model and we wanted to add it to our asset library. Well, all we would have to do in order to do that is just come over to the right-hand side of the page. Notice how this is where my Suzanne model is, and I could just right-click in here, and under ID data, there's an option in here for mark asset. And so when you mark something as an asset, what that's going to do is it's going to save it to this library right here. So because that's now marked as an asset, that's going to show up in here when I save the file. And then if I was to clear the asset, that would remove it from the asset library. So mark asset and clear asset are going to allow you to add those to this file. Well, now if I was to open a new file, and we want to make sure that we save this, but if I was to open a new file and then look in my Justin's asset folder, notice how that Suzanne model now shows up inside of my asset library, and I can bring it into Blender. So you can use this to save assets really quickly. So you could do something similar with, let's say that you wanted to add another material. So let's go back to our brick and stone file. All right, and so what I've done is I've created a new stone and marble material over here, and I'm just going to label it real quick, but we want to save this to our asset browser. And I'm going to assign it to these faces. So I've got this really simple marble material in here. Well, once you have that set up, what you can do is you can right click on it and do the same thing where you can mark it as an asset. So when you mark it as an asset, what that means is that now it's going to show up in your material list over here. Remember that I'm in my brick and stone blend file. Well, now if I save this, I'm just going to do a file save, and then we'll just open up a new model. Well, if I click on this drop down for Justin's assets, you can see how that marble file is now going to show up in here. And now you can apply it to materials inside of Blender. So saving those materials and then bringing them over into Blender is super fast using this new, using the new asset browser. All right, so just kind of a final note on when we can expect this to actually be released. So if we go back to their blog post back on February 29th of sort of been last year, they've kind of listed their timing of when they're expecting to release things. Now these do tend to change due to development, but this is supposed to be contained inside of Blender version 3.0, which is supposed to be coming out in August 2021. So hopefully we see this pretty soon, but in the meantime, you can definitely start learning how to use it and testing it by downloading the experimental version. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. If you're excited about the asset browser, I just love having that conversation with you guys. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it. I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.